Most 0 to 1 founders, you are you've identified a pain point, you're building product out, you feel that community can really help you in terms of getting your product out and getting those early adopters. But, it's going to take too much time. There's a lot of clutter now in the market. Am I the right person for it or not? Right. So specifically for someone who's literally at that day zero, MVP minus kind of a stage, right? Like what should they even like bother doing community building?
Absolutely. Yeah. As I said, one of the hardest things in B2B especially is getting your first few companies, right? It's if you think about it, and it's been tweeted about as well. It's really a miracle to get your first 10 companies, right? Just think about it, like how hard is it to get money out of someone, right? To pay for lines of code that appear on a screen, like it's incredibly difficult if you think about it. And so getting your first 5, 10 customers is such a massive psychological hurdle and frankly, a big burden emotionally. And so I think that the greatest way to do it, frankly, is to build a community around it first and become a thought leader. And the wonderful thing about this is that it's free. It's like you don't have to
Yep.
pay, right? There's no CAC, no performance marketing, no ads, no salespeople and at that point you can't afford anyway. And so it just, like makes a lot of sense, right? And it's not for everyone, I accept that, but I actually think it's an incredibly good way of starting up. And if you create the community in a very mindful way, I think people appreciate it rather than seeing it as a very salesy thing, right? For example, if you look at the way we structured, Inkle is a U.S. company building a U.S. product for U.S. companies, backed by U.S. and global investors, and we had never set foot in the U.S. Until recently. For the first couple of years and a couple of hundred companies, we didn't set foot in the US. It just shows how incredible the US economy is, of course. But on top of that, we largely did that through just being community driven, events driven. In the early days, of course, we weren't doing too many events, but community driven for sure, and thought leadership driven and content driven, right? And all of that is free, right? And that's the great thing about it. So I think community really can drive a wonderful start and a fast ramp up, and yeah, like some great examples of this. Airbase has a wonderful community called Off the Ledger. It's only for CFOs, right? And there's 4,000 or 5,000 CFOs in there, right? And they're very diligent about who they let in, right? And frankly, they're very unsalesy in there, right? So if you manage to get in, you'll see it's like a rich community of CFOs in the US, and they softly probably get access to these customers, but they don't hard pitch. They don't keep posting, and badgering everyone. So and that becomes a wonderful place for thoughts and for ideation, questions, and sharing. And then, of course, everyone knows it's Airbase's community, so it's an incredible way for them to sell. So for me, that's a great example, and we try to do something similar. WhatsApp, Slacks, all of these things are there, of course. And the tool often, is the big question. I think in the US, Slack is the default. In India, WhatsApp is the default. We tried others like Discourse and Discord and things like that. But honestly, I think these are the default tools. And to your point, I think just community, kind of surfaces when people have a shared, interest, a shared problem statement, a shared hair on fire problem. And if that's strong enough, the community will coalesce and grow rapidly. And if it's even stronger, people will throw their money at you to solve that problem in the community or through the community. And that's really what happened with us, I think.
This is so interesting. In fact, I see now repeat founders in the Bay Area, even before starting the next company, they actually start building distribution for that company. And whatever that idea might be, I mean, they broadly know if it's a consumer company or an enterprise software company, they almost start spending the first 2 years building distribution as they're even doing early customer development.
Yeah, it's the biggest problem with starting up is often not the product. It's funny because the earliest version of Inkle was so ugly, right? Primarily because I designed it. I'm terrible at design, right? And still, 50 or 100 companies signed up within the first, kind of month or two. It just shows that if the problem is deep enough, actually speaking, the design doesn't matter that much, right? It was terrible. It was like almost like Typeform. Frankly, if it was Typeform in the early days, and then if it had continued like that, still customers would have come. That's how deep the problem was, right? But to your point about how kind of this instigates from that to becoming much bigger, I think distribution can be the strength rather than the weakness, right? And if you make it a strong enough bond, then I think the community and the events and the thought leadership can really drive you and accelerate you faster than your competitors who are either in stealth or sometimes building in public but didn't get the community bit right. Things like that. We tried to balance it, and it was interesting. It wasn't that expensive, right? We spent money on events, of course. Even in India, we spent money on events. We wanted to really dominate the US-India corridor, and I think we were able to do that. We probably took a quarter of the market within the first year, right? The quarter of the market that was interesting to us, and then we were like, okay, cross-border is, whilst it's interesting and whilst it's a niche and whilst it's a beachhead and whilst it's got us to where we need to, and it's faster growing, of course, than US domestic because it was cross-border, and a lot of US founders were building US companies that didn't live in the US. For example, 49% of all companies on Stripe Atlas were residing overseas, right? According to the recent survey. So I found that really interesting that there was this massive explosion of US entrepreneurialism, but it was fueled half by foreign of people that didn't live in the US. So I thought, what, that could be a wonderful community, right? That have shared problems, because cross-border means complexity, tax, accounting problems, right? So I tried to think of it like that and form a community around that, and I think that was our starting point. But US-India corridor made a lot of sense to us, and then US to X corridors, so US to EU, US to Canada, those kind of aggregating those corridors made a lot of sense. But eventually what I came to was the conclusion that, hey, you know what, whilst cross-border is, especially US-India is interesting and complex, and I can build a moat and it's a beachhead, we have a license to win in the US, right? The product works in the US because it's built for US companies. It just happened to be built for cross-border US companies. But then if we go after US domestic, it's a much, much, much bigger market. It's more complicated. It's less complicated. It's more competitive for sure. But it's a vast market, and we have a license to win. Let's go after that. So we kind of removed a lot of cross-border language from our imagery and website and like that, and went after US domestic. And then the paradigm of community changed from being this kind of cross-border thing to being, hey, how do we build a community here in the US, right? And that actually happened kind of after SaaStr last year, and it's kind of a longer story, but yeah.